We are at a critical moment in the Middle East, and all options are open, as President Donald Trump has decided to give negotiations with Iran more time, while also holding up a big stick and otherwise signaling to the Ayatollah regime that he prefers the diplomatic option, but not for much longer. The White House meeting with Netanyahu on Wednesday ran longer than expected, as the Prime Minister of Israel reportedly presented Israel's red lines, and President Trump apparently replied by assuring his guest that if the negotiations collapse, the United States military is prepared for a significant operation. To emphasize that point, another U.S. aircraft carrier has been ordered to prepare for deployment to the Middle East, while Israel is also increasing the pace of preparations for a direct confrontation with Iran. Today, we will also take a look at some dramatic moves by the United States to block the flow of cash to Hezbollah in Lebanon, after Iran sent hundreds of billions of dollars to Beirut in suitcases in broad daylight. We'll also look at a brazen plan by Qatar to go behind Washington's back and make their own side deal with Iran, as a new nightmare scenario begins to emerge in the Arab world that if Tehran falls, Ankara is next in line. That's Turkey. So welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, and in this just before the weekend edition, we're bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and the Middle East. Wednesday saw 7 meetings between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and President Donald Trump in the United States. But this time, it was a low-profile event, as Netanyahu entered the White House through a back entrance with minimal press coverage. The Iranian issue was obviously on the top of the agenda, but before the meeting, Netanyahu met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and signed onto joining Gaza's Peace Council, which includes Turkey and also Qatar. Of course, there were also protests taking place in the streets of Washington against Netanyahu's visit, but that's no surprise to anyone. And at the center of the talks at the White House were Iran's arsenal of ballistic missiles and support of foreign proxies, which Israel insists must be included in any agreement, while Tehran refuses the American pressure that is tightening. The U.S. president defined his meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel as very good, but added that no decisions were reached, telling reporters simply that if a deal is achieved, I made it clear that this is the priority. If not, we will see what the results will be. However, despite this ambiguous statement, a short time later, it was reported that another U.S. aircraft carrier had been ordered to prepare for deployment in the Middle East, and there's no ambiguity whatsoever about that. And meanwhile, it was reported that the two leaders also discussed scenarios for the collapse of the negotiations and developments in the Gaza Strip. For their part, the regime in Tehran is wavering between fear and humiliating agreements and preparation for a military confrontation with the United States, because the Revolutionary Guards assesses that it is possible to observe a strike, but they warn against surrender that would undermine the foundations of this regime. And in the shadow of the negotiations in Oman, the wave of arrests in the foremost camp is expanding, and the Arab world is divided between the scenes. So furthermore, while Israel continues to push for a military action, the United States is wary of escalation that could cripple global energy markets and plunge the world into a deep recession. Perhaps because of these concerns, Qatar conducted a parallel diplomacy with Tehran in Doha and emphasized de-escalation. And at the same time, it is stepping up military readiness at the El Ubaida base in an attempt to influence Washington to prevent an attack. And in a related story, the Trump administration is tightening up efforts to cut off the secret pipelines of cash that is flowing to the Iranian axis, particularly to the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Of particular concern is the terror bank that was attacked in this war. At the same time, Iranian diplomats are using their diplomatic passports to transfer suitcases filled with money to the terrorist organization in Lebanon. And meanwhile, on the Gaza Strip front, we can report the elimination of a terrorist with the blood of 16 Israelis on his hands. However, Hamas has already moved to the next stage of the ceasefire, and the Gaza Strip is now operating under two parallel fantasies, and even contradictory ones. And one dangerous reality exists. First and foremost, we must face the fact of a terrible economic crisis in Gaza that has even led to the extreme phenomenon of terrorists being forced to sell weapons due to the reduction of funding sources that allow them to pay salaries on a regular basis. So, as you can see, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 859 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis in the Middle East. And a moment before we start, I want to call on you to continue and being ambassadors of the truth. You can do that by hitting the share button, leave a comment, look for us on social media. You can look for TBN Israel, Yair Pinto, and Mati Shoshani, and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. We do all of this so that you will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Let's begin. In the last 24 hours, the Pentagon ordered another aircraft carrier and a strike group to prepare to deploy to the Middle East. This comes almost immediately after the closed extended meeting at the White House between Netanyahu and Trump, and it obviously isn't a coincidence. In Tehran, they are already responding by repeating their threats against the United States and its bases in this region. So the question now is very simple. Is this pressure on the table to bring Iran to an agreement? Or has the system already started moving towards a strike, with the talks just being about providing a short window of time before the blow is struck? To answer that question, we'll start with the operational track. While in the closed rooms in Washington, they spoke about diplomacy on the ground, the Americans are increasing their presence in this region, not reducing it. This was the 7th meeting between Netanyahu and Trump within 1 year, and the 6th on the United States soil since Trump returned to the White House. But this meeting was unlike previous ones, because everything was conducted in a low profile, with Prime Minister Netanyahu coming into the White House through a back entrance and minimal press coverage of the summit. There were no statements at the start of the meeting, and no press conference was scheduled at the end of it. Even the location was relatively unusual, not in the Oval Office, but in the cabinet room at the White House. The message is clear. This was a serious meeting meant to conduct serious business with a minimum of fanfare and public exposure. However, there were people who didn't like that last part. Outside the White House, a pro-Palestinian protest was held with the noise of whistles and sirens in the background, attempting to draw attention and distract the leaders inside the White House trying to conduct the serious business that they were there to do. So even before Netanyahu sat down with President Trump at the White House, Netanyahu met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and signed a document joining the Peace Council for Gaza, which also includes Turkey and Qatar. This is a document that was signed earlier and was submitted now. And in simple words, while Washington is building a political track for Gaza with regional players, Jerusalem is trying not to lose control of the big picture, especially with Iran at the top. And following the meeting, precisely, Trump summed it up in a post on his Truth social media account, calling it a very good meeting, which is part of a long-standing and wonderful relationship between Israel and the United States of America. But he also said that nothing final was achieved except his insistence on continuing the negotiations with Iran to see if it's possible to reach a deal. He also said explicitly, if a deal is achieved, that is the priority. If not, we'll see what the results will be. He also mentioned Midnight Hammer, the operation in which Iran took a hit when it chose not to reach an agreement last time. It's a double message, with President Trump saying he's giving negotiations time, but he's also reminding everybody what happens if the agreement is not reached. As previously stated, Israel is not only concerned with the nuclear issue. Netanyahu came to the meeting with the hope of making it clear that Israel will insist on any agreement, including limits on Iran's ballistic missile capability, and an end to their support of the proxy terrorist groups all around this region. And above all, Israel is asking the Americans for freedom of action, because if the United States reaches an agreement that does not cover Israel's basic needs, Israel does not want to be constrained by it. In Jerusalem, they remember that the precedent of the previous decade and the JCPOA nuclear deal, Israel felt compelled to remind everybody that they had not signed off on this deal and were not bound by it. But in practice, Israel did not strike Iran's nuclear project for many years. The concern this time around is that everybody understands from the beginning that Israel is not tied down and might act forcefully, alone, if necessary, to ensure that Iran does not pose an existential threat. And speaking of which, there is a number of circulating events in the talks. The assessment that Iran could possess about 2,000 ballistic missiles within weeks. This is a figure that intensifies the argument over the framework, because if the arrangement and the talks are only about uranium enrichment while leaving out the ballistic missile capability, from Israel's perspective, that is an existential threat that remains on the table. And meanwhile, in Tehran, they are not lowering their profile. On the contrary, events this week are marking an anniversary of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards in 1979, included a display of messaging such as military parades, burning of flags of the United States and of Israel, and coffins with photos of American generals, including the commander of the United States Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper. This is not just provocation, but a message to the public at home and to the Pentagon. Cooper himself was present as part of the American delegation at last Friday's talks in Oman, and he also accompanied Witkoff and Kushner to the aircraft carrier Lincoln following the talks. This visit was also part of the negotiations, as the Americans wanted the Iranians to understand clearly that although they are talking, they are ready to stop talking and start bombing if that's what the situation will call for. For their part, the Iranian leadership are continuing with their usual positions. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says that he prefers diplomacy, but only if the agreement is fair and balanced, and clarifies that Iran will not be deterred from defending its sovereignty, whatever the cost may be. And furthermore, he emphasized that Iran will not give up the uranium enrichment, even if war was imposed. And meanwhile, the Secretary of Iran's National Security Council, Ali Larijani, repeated the explicit threat that if the United States attacks, Iran will attack all of its military bases in this region. He adds that no specific American proposal was presented in the talks in Oman, and sharpened the line that, from his perspective, the decision is about the nuclear program only, excluding missiles and additional capabilities. And another regime official, Ali Shamkhani, added that missile capabilities are not a topic of negotiations because these are basic defensive components of the state. So, here the operational gap comes in, because Israel is demanding to include missiles and proxies in the discussions, while Iran says there is nothing to talk about. The United States, at least outwardly, is trying to keep the track open, but is backing it with a military presence that can quickly be translated into a real pressure. And alongside the political arena, Israel is strengthening the defensive layers. In the defense establishment, they are accelerating the procurement of interceptors across all layers, with the understandings that the next campaign could include heavy and prolonged barrages of rockets and require logistical staying power. The top layer is Arrow, for intercepting long-range ballistic missiles outside the atmosphere. Below it is David Sling, for intercepting cruise missiles, UAVs, and precision missiles, while Iron Dome is for protecting the home front against short-range rockets. And alongside all of this comes the Iron Beam, It's a laser system which speaks of last interception and lower costs against the barrages. Everything works under one command and control system, which assigns an interceptor to each target in real time. And still, senior officials emphasize in close talks there is no hermetic defenses. Israelis must still enter the protective spaces during the barrages of rockets, just as we did in the multiple wars that we had just in the last 2 years. So now, let's take a moment to examine the internal situation inside Iran. In Israel's defensive establishment, they note that the regime is wavering between fear of a humiliating agreement and preparation for a military confrontation. The senior leadership of the Revolutionary Guards appear to believe that it is possible to absorb an American strike and it will not necessarily topple the regime, since historically air power alone does not bring down a government. But they also warn against opposite scenarios: surrender to the United States that dictates on nuclear issues, on missiles, and also on proxies that could undermine the foundations of the regime from within, harm the national honor, and open a survival crisis for the Ayatollahs. And on that note, the IRGC is also moving aggressively to preempt a revival on the street protests against them by arresting anyone and everyone who might be thinking about leading new demonstrations, including known figures in the reformist camp. This is a step that signals the leadership is also preparing for risk from within, not only from outside. And amidst all of this, the Arab world is divided about who and how to respond to this situation. There is an axis trying to buy time and push Trump toward diplomacy that includes Oman, Qatar, and Turkey, who are working overtime to prevent the war. Larijani himself visited Muscat in Doha this week to meet with senior officials and to apply reverse pressure on Washington. And meanwhile, Qatar, while it speaks about de-escalation, is also increasing readiness at the El Ubaida base. This is a Central American base, and according to the satellite images that were mentioned, Patriot launchers were also seen there on trucks, ready to deploy quickly or move quickly, depending on the threat. On the other hand, there are also other voices in the Arab world who want Iran to take a blow that will neutralize its power and crack this regime. An example raised in internal talks is Saudi Arabia, where, according to comments that are attributed to its defensive minister in close discussions, if the United States does not attack Iran, the Ayatollah regime will grow stronger. This is the real split, because while everyone talks about stability, not everyone wants the same outcome. So, where do things stand now? President Trump is leaving the door open for an agreement without nuclear and without missiles, but at the same time moving heavy forces to the region and making clear he will not let the negotiations drag on forever. Netanyahu is pushing to expand the agreement to missiles and proxies and to preserve freedom of action, while Iran answers, enrichment is not coming off the table. Missiles are outside the discussion, and if an attack comes, the American bases will become a target. Coming days will determine whether the additional aircraft carrier is only a lever of pressure or the first stage in an order of battle ahead of a major move. And if the talks collapse, the question will no longer be about if, but who gives the first order and who pays the first price. And here at TBN Israel, we will report about every development on this issue. So it's important for us that you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned to the truth in real time so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground by me, Yair Pinto, and our team here in Jerusalem on various social media networks. And now, we've talked a lot today about the kinetic battlefield here in the Middle East. But there is also a spiritual battle that is still taking place. And today, nearly 99% of Israelis do not know who Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew, is. Think about that. Nearly 99% of Israelis do not know Jesus. However, a miracle is unfolding. One for Israel ministry is sharing the gospel, and Jewish people are accepting Jesus in numbers not seen since the early church. Many Arabs are also finding faith and unity. One for Israel is an initiative of native-born Israelis, good personal friends of ours, sharing the gospel, discipling believers, and equipping spiritual leaders all across Israel. As Romans 10, verse 1 expresses, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. And your support helps bring the gospel back to Israel. So, I want to do something right now. Pick up the phone and call 800-879-5530. Again, that's 800-879-5530. To help share the gospel in Israel, visit oneforisrael.org/pray or scan the QR code that you see on the screen. Now, we are switching our focus to Israel's northern arena, as the Air Force struck Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon just this week. In the village of Beit al-Shaib, Abdallah Khalil Nasser was eliminated, and he's responsible for artillery in Hezbollah, the terrorist organization. Earlier in the Yanuach, Ahmed Ali Salami was also eliminated after years of advancing firing outlets and rebuilding weapons arrays from within civilian population. In the background, the organizational Secretary General Naim Qassem declared in Beirut, we will not disarm. The question now is very clear. Is Hezbollah even capable of holding on to its weapons when the money tap is being shut off? The United States Treasury announced new sanctions this week against the Hezbollah financial mechanisms, specifically El-Qard El-Hassan, the body defined as the organization's financial arm. According to the announcement, the institution operates under the cover of non-governmental organizations with a Lebanese license, but in practice, it provides banking-like services on a wide scale. So, in addition, sanctions were imposed on an international procurement and shipping network connected to Hezbollah's financial team in Iran. The network includes partners in Russia, in Turkey, Syria, and Iran, and uses forged documents to circumvent the restrictions. Shipping companies and also cargo vessels were also added to the backlist. And Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that Hezbollah poses a threat to regional stability, and the United States will act to isolate it from the global financial system. This move also comes after months of direct damage to the organization's financial infrastructure. During the fighting in the north, the Air Force struck branches of the El-Qard El-Hassan across Beirut. The IDF Arabic spokesperson said at the time that most of Iran's funding money and Hezbollah's independent income, all the sources are managed through those branches. And alongside the economic pressure, an unusual funding route was exposed. According to published information, at least 6 senior Iranian diplomats carried suitcases full of United States dollars on commercial flights to Beirut in recent months using diplomatic passports to avoid inspection. This was necessary because Israeli strikes have disrupted smuggling routes through Syria, so Beirut's airport became a central channel for transferring direct cash. And at the same time, Lebanon's central bank banked financial institutions in July last year from conducting transactions with the El-Qard El-Hassan, and it was reported that the next step is closing branches across the country. On the ground, Hezbollah is trying to rebuild its leadership, its weapons depots, and funding sources that were hit throughout this war. The rehabilitation costs are estimated at billions of dollars. But against declarations of legitimate resilience and refusal to disarm, reality is changing. Money moves in suitcases because the banking system is blocked. Gold is converted to cash because accounts are frozen, and shipping networks are shut down because they enter blacklists. The combination of targeted eliminations, strikes on financial infrastructures, and global sanctions puts the organization at a crossroads. If the cash tap truly closes, there will be nothing to rebuild and rearm with. The question is who breaks first, the access that funnels suitcases or the organization trying to survive without a bank. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development on these issues, so keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. Most importantly, do not forget to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, we are switching our focus to the Gaza Strip because this week, the IDF and the Shin Bet eliminated a Hamas terrorist who was responsible for the deaths of soldiers during the maneuver last year. In the defense establishments, they say that this is part of a clear line to dismantle Hamas and its ability to survive and be prepared for any kind of scenario. Even if right now Israel is doing everything so that the ceasefire holds, and even if the crossings are operating, the forces on the ground are preparing to shift up the gear. The latest elimination relates directly to the fighting area in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. This is Ahmed Hassan, the head of the sniper array of Hamas's Beit Hanun battalion. According to the defense establishment, he led a terror attack last year that resulted in 5 IDF soldiers losing their lives and 2 others being severely wounded. He was also involved in additional incidents. In one of them, Master Sergeant Ghaleb Nasser lost his life when an RPG was fired at a force that is operating in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip near a tunnel that was located between the forces and the fence. In another incident, Master Sergeant Asaf Kafri lost his life and 2 other soldiers were severely wounded. From the IDF's perspective, this is a message. Anyone who tries to rebuild terror outlines will be dealt with. Also this week, it was cleared for publication that Basel Chimoni, a senior Hamas figure responsible for the double bus attacks in Beersheva in 2004, was also eliminated. In the attack he planned and led, 16 Israeli civilians were murdered and about 100 others were wounded. Chimoni, originally from Hebron, was arrested, tried, and imprisoned, but later he was released in the Gilad Shalit deal that exchanged the Israeli soldier that was kidnapped to Gaza for multiple convicted Palestinian terrorists. Then, according to the IDF statement, he returned to recruiting attackers and directing terrorism, and during the war, he was also involved in producing and planting explosives against our forces, but he won't be doing that any longer because last week, he was terminated in a coordinated strike of the IDF and the Israeli Air Force. And amidst all of this, Hamas has already moved to the next stage in the ceasefire plan. In the Gaza Strip, 2 parallel and contradictory fantasies are unfolding. On one side, dreams of New Gaza, a civilian project, and on the other side, talk in Israel about returning to an intense military move whose goal is the final elimination of Hamas. However, the cargo terminal at the Kerem Shalom border crossing is being expanded to move large volumes of goods, and in Rafah they are talking about a green city project that will absorb population into an area that is controlled by the IDF. At the same time, Hamas operates like a shadow government, collecting protection fees from the merchants on every truck that enters, at levels that are spoken of about 15 to 20%, and taking commissions out of the money that's entering the Gaza Strip through international bodies. And within this comes an unusual sign of distress. In the Gaza Strip, reports are emerging about Hamas operatives who are forced to sell weapons or military equipment in order to survive. According to the claims, some terrorists are not receiving salaries regularly, and sometimes not at all, and they are looking for an alternative source of income. A source in Gaza described a harsh reality, but emphasized that these are point initiatives by individuals, not an organized phenomenon. On the other hand, there are also claims of weapons confiscations for civilians and an attempt to present such moves as part of a disarmament process. And here, the political pressure comes in. A senior official on the team leading the American process says that the ceasefire is not collapsing, that everything is moving forward, and that the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip has opened and is functioning. According to him, the small details of the disarmament are now being finalized, and next month, the dismantling of weapons is supposed to begin. This is planned to proceed in stages with tunnels that will be demolished, then production facilities, then RPGs and mortars, and only at the end, small arms. His claim is clear. This will be the last thing because in Hamas they fear clan revenge if they are left without rifles before there is one rule and one weapon. The gap between the talks are underground and remains dangerous. Hamas sees survival as victory, and the IDF is closing the circles and preparing plans for every kind of scenario. Now, everything depends on the question of whether the dismantling will be real or just another layer of smokescreen on the way to the next round of fighting. So, keep spreading the truth, share, follow us. The most important thing that you can do is unite in prayer. Pray for the situation, pray for wisdom to our leaders, pray for the IDF soldiers, pray for the Israeli home front, pray for the Iranian people. They need help. They need your prayers. They need a different leadership. Pray for the people of Iran. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.